Hello, 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 and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem, and today we're going to be looking at the Magical Mystery Bead Box for December 2023. So, I am a huge fan of art, and Klimt is just the most beautiful artist who makes wonderful usage of metallics. Now, I love metallics, being a jeweller. Quite like a little bit of wire, quite like a little bit of metal, and Klimt famously uses such beautiful metallic tones in the work that was created. I'd like to talk to you about a number of things today, and it's all quite exciting. When you join me, please do just give me a quick hello so I can see whether or not I'm just sat here by myself, because at the moment Facebook isn't being super helpful about whether or not I can be heard. So just give me a quick hello to let me know that you can see me okay, and then we will chat on about today's wonderful news that we've got to share with you. So right now I can't see comments at all, which is always an absolute win. So I'm just going to go ahead and proceed and imagine that you can see me and hear me acceptably, and hopefully one of our lovely Jessie James Beads elves will be on site to help with any queries that you might have. Welcome anyway. So as I mentioned before, Klimt is a firm favourite in the artists that provide me with inspiration as a jewellery maker and as somebody who likes to explore different ways of feeling artistic. So I'd like to take you through some of the things that you get in the Gustav Klimt box, which is the Magical Mystery Bead Box for December 2023. So I'm going to switch you to my other camera now. Let's just press a button and see what happens. So this is really exciting for me. The Kiss is the first Gustav Klimt image that I ever saw, and it led me to a love affair with this artist. So I hope that that is something that you have seen previously perhaps, or will be inspired to see more of in the future. So in the box for December 2023, you had an absolute plethora of goodies. There was a complete chain with findings already connected. So that's a little extender chain and a clasp. You also received a trilogy of wires. Now those colours to me are very expressive of this particular artist. You'll find a lot of golds and metallics in the work of Gustav Klimt, and I think those are really useful colours to work with in your designs. You also received, as well as that complete chain, this absolutely fabulous tassel. Very highly textured with an amazing head at the top there, and you've got a completed bail also that you can thread that directly onto chain or use it in your beadings. Now I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to be correctly pronouncing the piece that inspired this. Judith and the Head of Holofernes is how I would say it. If I've incorrectly pronounced that, do feel free to tag me and tell me. You also got a pair of charms featuring this artwork. This is the Kiss, and as I said, it's my first taste of Gustav Klimt as an artist. Absolutely gorgeous colour and blocking. You also received some additional, if I can open it, because when I do these up, I do them up super tight so they don't spill. I think I've over tightened the pot. There we go. You've got magnetic clasp in jewel tones. Look at that. You've got silver with a cognac colour crystal. You've got gold with a white crystal. You've also got a toggle clasp in there as well. Now I've started, and I'm going to carry on because we've got the portrait of Emilie Flöger, which features these absolutely incredible seeded pieces. Now you can think of them as pendants, ready-made earrings. You've got little apertures up at the top. You can slide those directly onto earring findings if you want to. You've got floral beads, you've got metallics, you've got fancy beads, you have got pads, you've got metallics again, the soft gold as well as the bright silver. Now I've withdrawn a handful of beads from this mix to work with on a design today. So they came from the portrait of Emilie Flöger. Let's put that box back out of the way. In my demonstration piece, I used beads from this collection, which is Water Serpents, which is absolutely divine. Just a most beautiful collection. I'm just going to swipe one of these miniature cloisonne inspired beads to use in our demonstration piece as well. And you'll see that quite often I'll find something and I'll make a little something and I'll put it back in the box to inspire me further later. So that was 2 of 4 bead mixes. You also have, and again forgive my pronunciation, Hygeia perhaps. Look at this. Oh my word. That is absolutely stunning. Complete with a bail. If you want to use that as a pendant, you absolutely can. That is ready to go. You've got more tassels. You've got these funky, almost Art Deco inspired big beads. You've got colours and you've got textures to boot. The red in that, the red and the gold together is amazing. And they're so well packed that it's sometimes a struggle to close those bead boxes back. Now, The Woman in Gold. Very good film featuring Ryan Reynolds if you ever fancy it. Not to do with this particular painting, but something along the same lines. Here's a design that I'm playing around with at the moment, which we'll be looking at perhaps at another time, using components from this box. And this has to be one of my favourite boxes within a Magical Mystery Bead Box ever. Look at that. Celestial bodies for the win. And this actually inspired me to make the piece we're going to work together with in a few minutes, as I've got some more things that I want to share with you before we move on with our tutorial today. But check that out. Isn't that absolutely magnificent? Not to mention all of the cool, awesome and gorgeous things that you have in there. So I chose to work with 2 different sizes of rings. One is slightly textured, one is polished. And also one of these metallic toned round pad beads. I'm just going to tumble those things back into the box. But I am also going to show you that one more time because it's an absolute stunner. Now, Sarah asked me to mention to you that we do have a limited quantity of the Klimt boxes available. I've popped the link in the video description. Again, apologies that I can't see any of your comments at the moment. I hope that you are well. I will have to get my weather check fix with you next time we're live together. In the UK, it is just above freezing at the moment. It's about 2 degrees, 1 to 2 degrees, which I think is about 34 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's chilly for us. I know you guys get it a lot colder, and when it snows properly, and we have 3 flakes, and then we just stop doing because we can't cope with it. Look at that. That is absolutely stunning. This is the thing that I'm missing right now. This to represent the glowing orb in the sky that currently can't be seen from the UK. The sun, that's what it's called. So you can see we have an absolutely gorgeous collection within the Magical Mystery Bead Box for December 2023. This is the chain. It's a complete chain with a little dropper, extender chain and a beautiful smooth clasp as well. So we're going to be working to create something that will go on that as a pendant in a little while, but there's a couple more things I want to talk to you about. This is what I've chosen to work with tonight. I wanted to talk to you quickly about a handful of tools. This I have been waiting for my whole life. How many times have I said to you, beautiful people, if you don't have a bail maker or you need a larger round form, just grab something from your house like a lotion bottle or the handle of something. Well, now I've got this lovely collection of wooden mandrels. We're going to use some of these tonight to help us with our design. And the largest of these is 1 inch in diameter, and it's a really lovely tactile smooth wood. We're also going to be using the smallest of these, which is a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to put those to one side. These come in a little handy carry pouch, keeping them safe and smooth. So already got my dog hairs on, sorry about that. That's probably Mojo and that one's probably Joey. The dog's making an appearance. We're also going to be working very soon with these beautiful little babies. Check that out. What a gorgeous finding. Now, I hadn't used this particular findings form before tonight, and I made this particular piece here which you could use as a connector or as an earring chandelier. It took about 60 seconds, and I did that with very little in the way of preparedness. So that is launching, or recently launched, one way or the other. Grab yourself one of those, really handy to make very easily repeatable designs. Another quick flash on your screen are these tapered, graduated, I think they're called looping pliers, and you have got the exact measurements going down the prong of the plier there. So if you want to be able to use those just to create exacting shapes and forms as another alternative to your bail making pliers, or just as a really handy pair of ultra chunky round nose pliers, those are absolutely gorgeous. We've also got beautiful wooden forms again, and this is to help you form bangles and bracelets. Now, I did have a round one of these, not 100% sure where it is quite right now, but if you want to work a variation on a theme of today's tutorial, which we're getting to in just a second, these things are absolutely magnificent. They come in a round and an oval, bangle and bracelet block and form. If you're very gentle and you have a nylon hammer, you can even hammer on them, but I think they're too beautiful, so maybe don't squish them too firmly. So we're going to be working with these today. In addition to that, I'm going to be using some 16 gauge wire. Now, this is a nice chunky thick heavy wire, and it helps you to create the piece that we're going to work on. I'll unveil it in a minute. If you don't have any 16 gauge, you can use 18 gauge, but you'll need to run it between thumb and forefinger a couple of times ahead of the time that you work it, just so that it gets nice and smooth and warm to work, but so that it hardens up a little bit firmer. So what's exciting is the Magical Mystery Bead Box. If you are not already a member of the MMBB, Magical Mystery Bead Box group on Facebook, do hop on over and have a join. It's not competitive. It's not in any way overawing. It's a wonderful collection of people sharing designs, ideas, and a love of making jewellery. So do join us there. And as from today, let me just show you my excited face. Hold on. I'm still here. This is my excited face. We have got a challenge for you, starting from tonight's live show right here, right now. If you'd care to make your interpretation of the design I'm going to share with you in just a couple of minutes, share that in the Magical Mystery Bead Box group. And one of our lovely folks will be able to point you to that group if you are unable to find it. I'm hopeful, because as I said before, I can't see any comments at all. They're not showing up for me today. Sometimes Facebook does this and it's a little bit of a rotter. Hopefully everything is going fine and I'm not just here by myself. I mean, it's fine. I like to talk, so if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. What we're going to do is ask you to make your variation. It's going to be a challenge. If you upload a photograph of your variation of tonight's tutorial design into the Magical Mystery Bead Box group with the hashtag, and I'm just going to check my notes, MMBB challenge, within the next 2 weeks, anytime within 2 weeks from the live show, you'll be entered into a random pull to win a $50 gift card. How cool is that? Just by playing along with me on the live, anytime within the next 2 weeks, get that uploaded, and it is hashtag MMBB challenge. Have a go. You might bag yourself a $50 gift card. Let's head down to the board and get making for today's Magical Mystery Bead Box. So this is The Kiss by Gustav Klimt. Do feel free to check out all of the beautiful artworks that you can find on the wonderful world of information. So the piece that we're going to make is a pendant. You can make that as an opera monocle, which it's been suggested to me that that's what it looks like, and I'll just demonstrate. I'll show you an opera monocle. What I say, Jacinta, I can't see right over in the back. Do you think you could lend me your opera monocle? Yeah, I'm kind of wishing I hadn't done that, but you know, if you expected normal, you probably wouldn't be watching Jen. This is what we're going to make. I think that these halo pendants are absolutely divine, and you can make them really any size that your bead collection allows you to. And as I mentioned, we're going to make the frame with 16 gauge wire. I'm going to be using my 1-inch mandrel to create that frame. So let's just scooch that over to the side for a second. If you don't have any 16 gauge, do consider getting some. It's a very useful wire, but you can use 18 gauge, but it will be just a little bit softer as you work the design. I'm looking at around about 12 inches of wire. I'm working with an antique bronze colour copper core wire here. And this is around about 12 inches of round 16 gauge. So I've given that a quick smooth through. It's very firm under the fingers. It's quite a firm wire today. So it's more of a German style than a nice soft wire. But I actually really respect it being a little bit harder. It makes life easier for me in a moment. So what we're going to do is start around about 1/3 of the way along and create a round form on my mandrel. I'm going to be using my beautiful new round gorgeous mandrel just like so. And I'm just going to swap that over at the top for a second and allow that to relax out slightly. So if you want to make a slightly larger design, you can of course use your bangle or bracelet drum. These are really, really handy to have. Also, if you wanted it to be just slightly larger, you can just pinch that out. So on the side where we have the longer length of wire, that's going to become our upright. So I'm just going to hold my pliers across the top centre of the design and push the longer tail of wire up. Now that's not a very sharp bend at the moment, so what I'm going to do is switch my grip, get the dog hair out of the camera and just straighten that up slightly, just to make that a little bit neater. So overall I'm quite happy with my round form, and what we're going to do is wrap twice around that core wire with the shorter tail. So what is likely to happen when you start wrapping this tail around the core is that the size of the circle will shrink down, and that's because you're pulling this last little bit of wire out of the circular form and drawing it around the core. Well, if you have a set size that you want to work with, one of the things that you can do is leave your mandrel or round form in position, and it will prevent you from shrinking down the size of the circular form. So if I just switch this around to help my grip, move things over ever so slightly, what we're going to do is just try and angle this so you can see best the shorter tail of wire. I'm going to make a right angle bend just past the point where it crosses over that upright. The easiest way for me to do that is actually to just remove the mandrel out of position for a second, put my pliers across and create that right angle bend. So if I push the wire over the back, you'll see exactly what it is I've done. I've got that right angle bend and I can slide that back onto the mandrel for now. So it's just slightly larger than I needed it to be. So in this instance I'm going to allow the wire to come from that circular form and wrap slightly around the upright. If you've decided that you don't want to leave the mandrel in position, what you can do is pop those pliers in like so and pull the wire manually whilst holding it firmly with the pliers. But the simplest thing that you can do is leave it on the mandrel. I just wanted to show you that there are two options, but let's now go for the easiest option. So we're going to start bringing the shorter tail around that upright core wire, and undoubtedly it's going to start smacking into the camera any second now. So I'm going to take that tail around twice. And because I'm working with a hard wire, what can happen is you get this little gap in the middle there. And you can just pull the wire around until that disappears. Just give that a little bit of a smooth and a tighten up. Or you can not worry about it. You can use 18 gauge. or you can just keep turning that until you've got those 2 coils. If I just turn that sideways, you can see I've rotated that wire around the core twice. It's very baggy at the moment, so I'm going to trim that tail of wire away just to make life easier, and that is more than plenty to make a really gorgeous little spiral with a small loop, which will add to a jumble design which will happen throughout the year. So I'll explain more about that in a little while. What we're going to do is press that circular coil until it sits neatly around the core. Now this is the point at which you're likely to shrink down the size of your circular form. So I'm just going to bring this towards the end of my round form, my mandrel, my beautiful new wood mandrel, and I'm just going to complete turn and turn, and I'm rotating my pliers around in the same direction that the wire is moving, and you'll find that it tightens up that coil really neatly. So once we've got that tight around the core wire, we're going to take that central section away and compress the spring down, like so. So basically what we've made is a wrapped loop, but I'm just showing you a couple of different ways that you can create that in a really large size using that wooden mandrel form. So that's all good, and I'm happy with all of that. One of the things that you will need to check is I've added a beautiful inspired by cloisonne bead onto the post. Your bead will need to fit on whichever wire you choose. So let's have a look and see if that goes on the 16 gauge. It absolutely does. So I'm going to reserve that for later. I'm going to pop that back in the bowl for now. This is a mixing bowl from my nan's doll's house, just in case you wondered what I was doing, as is very common with people in my life. The next thing we're going to do is start haloing on some beads. So you can add a halo of beads all the same. You can vary between however many you wish to use. You can have them shoulder to shoulder so that they're all really clustered up tightly. Or you can work with a little bit of a gap design. So I'm going to work with a gap design because I've got these beads today. If I spill a handful of those out, and I'll alternate between the 2 colourways. One is a fancy cut and one is a bicone. I'm just going to unspool a section of wire. This is a raw copper colour 26 gauge round, and I think I'm going to take off around about 4 feet of wire. That's because it's going to be more than I need, but it will give me options on how I want to add my beads into position as we move through. So again, this is 26 gauge wire, around about 3.5 to 4 feet in length. So up to probably around about 40 inches, I would say. We're going to add a wrap of 5 rotations around either shoulder. If you're left dominant, you might like to work in a clockwise rotation. If you're right dominant, you might like to work in an anti-clockwise rotation. So I've got around about 1 inch of wire just over the top of that little round frame we've created, and I'm just going to start winding that around to create a coil. So let's pull that all the way around. If you start off with 4 wraps, put 4 wraps between each bead. If you start off with 3 wraps, again, just repeat that number between each bead. I would say probably 5 wraps is a good amount because it covers a little bit of the wire up. So let's say I've actually already got 5 wraps, but let's say, for instance, that I had only got 4 wraps and I needed to add a little bit more. All you would do is bring the wire up through the centre while supporting that coil, draw that all the way through and over to the outside of the design. So what I'm going to do is scooch that coil of finer wire all the way up to the neck of the piece. So we're looking at the neck of the design right now. If I rotate this around so that it works best for me, and when you're making jewellery with wire, it really does pay you to take a moment to work out what is best for you, because it can be a little bit, let's say, tiring if you do this day in, day out for 12 hours a day for, let's say, 13 years. Not that I have experience of that, but that. And we're going to find the other end of the wire. If you do work a lot with wire, it can be a little bit tiring on your wrists, so look after yourself. Now that last little inch or so is a little bit on the wiggly side, so I'm going to get rid of that, put it in the scrap pot, and I'm going to add my first bead. So I've chosen to work with a couple of beads from, I think it was the Emily Florida collection. Let's start with the Fancy Shape bead, and this has got a really beautiful, it's almost purple undertone. It's kind of difficult to see it on the screen, but it's absolutely glorious. So what I'm going to do now is take the end of the wire away and zip line that bead all the way down into position. Now this haloing technique works really well with round, rondelle, slightly off round, funny fancy beads that are basically round. Did I mention bicones? Works incredibly well with bicones. So we've slid the bead so that it sits around the outside of that lovely circular form, and I'm going to hold the bead firmly whilst I draw the tail of the finer gauge wire up and underneath and then up through the centre. So I'm pulling that tail all the way through. Once I've got the tail through, we can just release that for a second. We're looking for the bead to sit against the outside edge of that lovely circular frame, or the opera monocle if you prefer. We want that to have very little movement, but we don't want to compress it so much that it will shatter. So let's hold the bead firmly, and then we're just going to put a little bit of tension, and we've now got a little bit of tension on that little cross of wire. It's come up the inside of the hoop and it's gone all the way back around the outside. So because we started with, let's say 5, I can't actually see to count, we're going to repeat that design. So that's a second wrap. When you're working with fine wire like this, a 26 gauge, it doesn't appreciate being warmed through. It doesn't appreciate being overhandled. So what I'm going to do is push that up. I'm touching it as little as possible, and where I am going to be touching the finer gauge wire, it's usually at the end that I'm about to use. So any working that I'm doing is close to being used. If you constantly pull that wire between thumb and forefinger and overheat it, it will become brittle, which is the opposite of what we want in jewellery. We want it to last for ages. So I've got 3 wraps. I'm going to push that wire up and through, pull it all the way through. Every time I pull the wire up and through, I'm going to give that a scooch over. So that's a 4th wrap. Push the wire up again, and there I've got my 5th wrap. So I'm just going to alternate between the fancy slightly purple bead and the vibrant almost teal colour, maybe an apatite colour. Once I've got my second bead in position, I'll decide how much of a gap I want between those beads. So let's just make sure that our coils are nice and neat and tidy. I tend to use my nails just to compress that coil up, because it means there's less risk to your wire work and less risk to the bead. So again, I'm going to find the tail end of that wire and apply the bead, and then I'm going to whip that away whilst the bead zip lines all the way down and I get the bead to sit. The beauty of bicones and this design is you can see that that one edge, that first edge of the bicone, sits beautifully flat against the outside of our opera monocle. I think I might just admit that it's an opera monocle. It's a pendant, it's a halo pendant. So let's push that wire underneath and then up through the centre, pull the tail all the way through. Now you may find that the wire wouldn't want to kink, so just go slowly. Now you can see I haven't put enough tension in this just yet, so we'll pull that wire until it's nice and neat, but not so much that we damage the bead. So let's do those 5 wraps really quickly. That's 1, that's the second wrap, that's the 3rd wrap, there we have the 4th wrap. This is usually where things start to get knocked off the desk, and then let's pull that wire through a 5th time. So once I've tidied up that coil, what you can do is spread the beads apart slightly. So if you feel that you've only got a couple of beads that you want to use on a design, let's say you want to reserve them for matching earrings or something, then you can spread that design out a little bit and just try and keep the gaps even. However, if you want to absolutely cluster those beads on, you can compress the design, but you do need to estimate whether you have enough beads to complete that circular form. That's why in this piece there are 3 different beads, and there were enough in the collection for this to work perfectly. So I'm just going to do one more wrap in this part of the tutorial, and then we'll move on to the next section, because you don't really need to see me do the same thing over and over again. So let us now gather one more of those beautiful purple fancy shaped crystals. Let's find the end of the wire, zip line the bead into position. Now if you look right now, I can see immediately that that's not equally distanced. So in order to have my beads sat equidistant from one another, I'm just going to very gently tease that coil of wire over slightly and then eyeball it. So you can probably use a measuring device if you prefer, but I am 100% here for just, does it look right? Yes, then that's a win. So again, we're going to hold that bead firmly in position, bring the tail of wire underneath the design, push the loop up inside the centre and draw that all the way through. Now we need to just tension that first section. That looks pretty good. If your beads move and drop whilst you're holding the design thusly, you probably don't have quite enough tension. Let me demonstrate. So if that kind of flops around a little bit, then the wire isn't really firm enough in position. So just give that a little bit of a gentle extra help and get it to sit exactly how and where you want it to. So the idea is that the beads continue to change between design, or you can have them further apart and just use the one type of bead, whatever works best for you. I'm going to whiz that around 5 times, and then we're going to move on to the next step of today's video. Again, huge apologies that I can't see any of your comments coming through. I hope that you have all had a wonderful start to 2024. It's my absolute pleasure to be here with you today, launching the challenge. If you've only just joined us, check back on what we talked about. We showed you some cool tools. We had a look through the Gustav Klimt Kiss box, so we've had a quick look at that. There are a limited number of those available. The link is in the video description, so hop on over, grab yourself one of these. It's a stunner. And what you would do for this part of the design is continue all the way round. When you get to the last section, you will need to finish off with the same number of wraps as you started with. So I think there probably are 6 just there, but I'm going to assume that there's 5. If you need to adjust your bead ratio slightly, you still have the capacity to do that. You can just gently move them around to fit the gap that you have available. So before we move on, please imagine that I have completely filled this design with that halo of beads. To continue further, what we're going to do is make sure that this is nice and straight. It's easier to straighten that up before you continue, but I've just realised it's slightly imperfect and it will annoy me, so I'm just going to give that a second, just to get that good and straight. So before we add in our bead onto the neck of the design, we did check that our cloisonné inspired bead did fit on that 16 gauge wire, so happy. What we're going to do now is add in a short amount of the 20 gauge wire. Now I've got some 20 gauge in gold, and I'm going to just unspool around about 8 inches or so. 20 gauge is lovely after you've been handling this really heavy wire to create the round form for your pendant. It's surprising just how soft the 20 gauge wire is. So this is a copper core medium temper gold colour wire, and you could use either a soft wire or a German style medium temper. It doesn't really matter. What we're going to do with this will be acceptable with pretty much all wire types. So we're going to just give that a quick warm through. This one I think is a little bit firm, it's been out in the cold. So what we will need to do now is start coiling that around on the core. The core is the section coming away on the neckline here. So what I tend to do to save my fingers from being too poked and prodded is I'll leave about 1 inch over the end, and I'll wrap the long tail again. This was around about 7 or so inches, 7 or 8 inches maybe, of that 20 gauge. I'm going to wrap that a couple of times just around the core wire that we're working with. Now you can see immediately that there's a tail going off at a jaunty angle. We don't actually want that jaunty angle. We want that to be nice and neat and tidy. So once I've got a grip on the wire, on that central core, we can tidy that coil up. You'll notice that one side of my chain nose pliers is to the north of the central core, and the other side of the pliers is to the south of the central core. And when you draw those together, you will compress, and you can swap in the opposite direction as well, and you'll get a really lovely neat coil of wire. So if you do wind your wires on and they have gone a little bit awry, that's how you can save. Also, don't feel that you have to use every last scrap. We do want a nice flush cut on the end. I'm using my beautiful professional flush cutters, wouldn't be without them. They are absolutely wonderful. So what we're going to do is just smooth down the end of that additional gold coloured 20 gauge, and then we're going to push that all the way down so that it sits just above the top of the coil of the wrapped loop. Now what I'm doing here is I'm very gently undoing that coil slightly so that I get the cut end to sit at the back of the design. You can close up any little gaps just by using that compression technique I just showed you, and get that to sit with the cut end right at the back. So I've decreed that this is the front of my design, so that looks neatest. Let's add in that beautiful cloisonné inspired bead. Slide that all the way down the neck. It did go on, you saw me. I think I've bent the wire. We did check this, I promise. Check back on the video and you'll notice that that does fit on. I am just failing at getting it through the hole. There we are. It's been a long day, what can I say? So what we're going to do is just scooch that lovely golden wire from the top where it is right now, making sure that I haven't adjusted the cut end being anywhere other than where I want it to be. And I'm just going to draw that around. Now you can go from the top to the bottom, from the top to the top, whatever makes you happy. I think I'm going to go from the top of the core wire. Finer gauge wire, in this case the 20 gauge, has wrapped around. The wire comes away on top, so I'm going to take it to on top because I like how that looks. And then I'm going to draw that around the core wire, but as it comes out of the top of that bead. So once I've got the swoosh in position, I'm happy with how the swoosh is sitting, I'm going to rotate this a good 5 or 6 times, and I'll try and keep those coils neat. If they go a little bit not so neat, again, you can compress them down, or you can not worry overly because we're about to cover it with the heavy gauge wire. So there's a reasonable quantity of that 20 gauge to use as well. And we're going to give that a little bit of a compress to make it neat and tidy. So what we're going to do at the top of the design now is to create a hanging loop, or a bail if you prefer, if you're going to wear this as a pendant, you know, opera monocle and all. So we're going to use the smallest of the beautiful wooden dowel or mandrel sets, and this is a 1/4 inch. A 1/4 inch. You can obviously make a larger one if you want it to pass over a large chain, but this actually works really well with this design. You could, as I say, use a larger one if you prefer. So what I will do at this stage is draw the wire, the heavy gauge wire at the top of the design forwards, and I've just left a tiny gap to allow that bend to happen. If you try to bend directly above the coil, you'll end up bending a little bit of the coil, so just leave a teeny tiny gap. Give that a quick warm through, because this wire is firm, it's sturdy, but it means that your design is sturdy. What we're going to do now is wrap around the dowel. I tend to do this in 2 stages because it's easier to show you the process. Let's bring that wire all the way around. So once you have that in position, let's just take that off for a second. You'll see that that 1/4 inch dowel makes a really good size jewellery bail. And what we're going to do is to take this tail of wire around the core above our little bead that we popped on. Now, the only issue that I'm going to have here is that it's going to hit either the camera or the desk. So what I might do is just cut a little bit away. Now the risk, I don't want you to cut any away. The risk of doing this is that I won't then have enough wire to fit all the way down to where the bead sits. So I'm only trimming some away because it makes it easier to show you what happens. All we're going to do is wrap that around, and we're going to cover up the preceding wrap. So it's heavier at the top, super strong, and if I run out of wire, it's because I trimmed some off to demonstrate, and I'm not going to let it worry me at all. So we're making a coil on top of a coil. You do need a little bit of good grip strength with this, but as I mentioned at the very beginning of this tutorial, you can simply use the 18 gauge instead if the 16 is a little bit cumbersome for you. So I've taken the tail of wire to the back, and look at that, we had just enough. Phew, Jem heaves a sigh of relief. Let's flip that over to the rear of the design. I'm going to trim that just past. The only reason I put my finger so close to my cutters is A, I've been using this style of cutters for a very, very long time, and I feel very confident that I'm not going to trim the tip of my finger, but also it stops the wire pinging off and hitting my camera, which you only do that once because cameras are expensive. So let's take that tail end and just push it down, very, very mindful of the bead. Can you see I'm keeping those pliers away from the bead itself? If I just tilt that in the light, I'm not touching the bead at any time, I'm just compressing that wire down. So if you use your imagination, you should be able to figure that these beads will more than fill the round form that we created. And that is how I chose to work with The Kiss by Gustav Klimt. So let's just head back up to me. It's still me. You'll have to forgive me wearing 96 layers and looking a bit like Monsieur le Michelin because it's really cold and I don't deal with the cold very, very well. So The Kiss was the first Klimt photograph of his artwork that I ever saw, and it's absolutely divine. The box is beautiful. Check out the new tools. Check out the links to get the handful of Klimt boxes that are still available. It's an absolutely stunning collection. So many metallics in there. I adore it. These are brilliant. And also, MMBB Challenge. That's your hashtag to use when you head over to the Magical Mystery Bead group. If you need assistance finding it, just at symbol Jessie James Beads, and one of our beautiful elves will help you find your way to the group. Do join us if you've not joined us there before. It's a lovely, lovely group of people sharing what they make with gorgeous Jessie James beads. I am going to hang up my microphone now, and I will be back with you very, very soon. I'm on a live with you in 2 weeks' time, and I'm not going to tell you what we're doing. So I hope that you will join me with the challenge, and I hope that you have enjoyed the tutorial with the Klimt collection. Do check out the artworks by Gustav Klimt, absolutely stunning. If you're like me and you're a bit of a magpie and you like sparkly, metallic, golds, definitely the artist for you to be inspired by. Have yourself the most wonderful day. Keep warm, keep safe, and I'll see you very soon. Bye for now.